one of the youngest, young dynamic renowned nephrologist in India. He has more than 25 years of experience in the field of nephrology, dialysis and transplantation. Currently, he is the chief nephrologist at Fortis Hospital, Kolkata. Dr. Datta has led the nephrology department to glory and currently undertakes 2,500 dialysis per month on an average. Dr. Datta has been an instrumental person in bringing and practicing new technology like CFPD, FPD, CRT, hemodialysis, plasmapheresis in this region. Quality of dialysis has been his focus and he is credited to be having many patients on long-term dialysis. He has achieved an excellent results in kidney transplantation comparable with any international standard. He has a large experience in spousal donor transplantation and induction immunosuppression. With this, I would present the momentum. Yes, Roland, momentum to Dr. Datta. As this oration is there, no question please.
Good morning. Thank you for, this is a great honor. I thank Dr. Patnaik and my old friend Dr. Shubhantu Dasgupta for inviting me here, and this is indeed a great honor for me. Now, the topic given to me is peritoneal dialysis, but I know that this is a mixed crowd, so I have extended the topic. So I'm going to extend the topic slightly. I'll speak about peritoneal dialysis, the science of it, and also I'll discuss a bit about its place in the overall scheme of things. How does PD fit into the overall scheme of renal replacement therapy, which is the other players are, as you know, hemodialysis and kidney transplantation. So, firstly, we must know that what is the burden of renal failure in our country. Now, this is actually huge. With a total population of 1.2 billion, the ESRD incidence has been calculated to over 175 per million population. The prevalence is not really in an increasing proportion because most of our patients either die because they cannot afford this therapy, and in some instances because of underdosing, the survival may be a little lower. So the prevalence is about 350 per million. So that means the total ESRD patients at this point is about 4 lakhs in this country. And you can understand that in another 3-4 years' time, this is going to increase to about 6 lakhs. So what options do we have for these patients? We know that there are several stages of CKD. Firstly, you go from stage 1 to stage 4, and whatever you do, there is a chance that the kidney function might deteriorate. We have good drugs, we have good control of hypertension, diabetes, diet control, and many other things. But many of these patients actually progress to end-stage renal failure. And when you reach stage 4, which means that, some of these lines are not coming here. At stage 4, we start preparing for renal replacement therapy. Stage 4 means when your GFR is less than 30. And when your GFR is less than 15, you start talking about implementing the renal replacement therapy. So it's a progression from stage 1 to stage 5. So what options do we have for this? The best treatment is kidney transplantation. Now, transplantation cannot be offered to all. Of course, the more younger patients qualify for transplant. If you're more than 65, you're a diabetic, you have multiple comorbid conditions, you have heart disease or liver disease, we generally do not offer transplant, and they can be on dialysis. Many patients choose to be on dialysis because they don't have a donor or there's a waiting list before they can do the transplantation. So the options are transplantation, number 1, and then 2 kinds of dialysis, hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis. Hemodialysis is better known because it has been there much earlier for many, many decades now, and it's a very, very well established therapy. And there are about 100 dialysis units in this state now with maybe over 400 dialysis machines. And a large majority of patients are indeed on hemodialysis. Now, what does hemodialysis do, basically? We create an AV fistula. That means we create a vascular access by joining the artery and a vein. This gets mature in about 2 to 4 weeks' time, through which we can draw the blood. One is the arterial line by which we draw the blood out. We circulate it through this machine. Actually, the dialysis is taking place in this hollow fiber dialyzer here. The machine is just a monitor and a blood pump. And the clean blood, the blood is cleaned in this hollow fiber dialyzer, and the blood is returned through the other prick here. On an average, you take about 3 to 4 hours, and you do this about 2 to 3 times a week. This is a passive therapy. This has got predictable clearance. The importance and the other good factor is that there are free days. You can do it on 2 to 3 days a week, and the other days the patient is free. The bad thing is that you have to come to the hospital for this. You can't do it at home. Of course, nowadays some home hemodialysis machines are also coming in the West, not so popular in our country as yet. There's the issue of compliance, and of course, there is an issue of hemodynamic stress. The bad thing is that this is a little stressful for the hemodynamics. With improved machines and water systems, this problem has been circumvented to quite a bit, but still some patients do get angina or hypertension while they are on dialysis, particularly if you have got heart disease. Now, peritoneal dialysis is a very simple form of therapy. Somehow this developed after hemodialysis, but it's actually a very, very simple thing, and its beauty lies in its simplicity, actually. You put in a peritoneal catheter. This is done by local anesthesia. Sometimes even the nephrologist can do it, and most hospitals do employ surgeons for this implantation. And after an interval period of about 7 to 14 days, sometimes we do it even earlier, one can begin the peritoneal dialysis. What we are doing here is we are using the peritoneal membrane as a semi-permeable, because of the semi-permeable properties, we're using that as a filter. And we are putting fluid in the abdomen, which is made to dwell for an interval of 4 to 6 hours, or sometimes maybe 8 hours, depending on the patient's condition. We drain that fluid, and we put fluid back again. So we do about 3 to 4 exchanges in a day. Patient generally has fluid in the abdomen practically all the time, and there is a diffusion and ultrafiltration taking place within that fluid. And if you do it with a substantial volume, you can keep the body all right. So PD solution is placed in the abdomen, and this is in contact with the peritoneal membrane, and the waste will really diffuse into the fluid. And because this fluid is hyperosmolar as compared to the plasma, this fluid is going to draw in a lot of more fluid from the body, which means if you put 2 liters of CAPD fluid in the abdomen and allow it to dwell for, let's say, 6 hours, at the end of 6 hours, the 2 liters will become 2.4 or 2.6 liters because you will draw in some extra fluid by osmotic ultrafiltration. Now, what you are seeing there is an exchange. Like the abdomen is empty now, and you've got a full bag, the fluid is going in. It's not done so fast, it is made to stop there. But in this animation, I cannot stop it. So fluid dwells in the abdomen for about 6 to 8 hours, sometimes 4 hours, and then it is made to drain out. So this process is an exchange. This is known as an exchange, that you put the system to the patient, you drain out the previous fluid, you fill in the new fluid, and you take the system off, and then the patient can move around. So what you're doing here, so let's say this is the body, the brown circle, the brown ellipse is the total body water. We're not clearing the blood, we are clearing the total body water. Urea creatinine is there in the total body water. We are expanding the total body water by putting PD fluid and now to dwell. So there is peritoneal solute transport happening across the peritoneum, and you see that this fluid is getting all that solutes are really diffusing into this, and this is a bag which has already been in the abdomen and then drained out. This bag, the exchange is taking place, and you have got 2 more bags in waiting. So in a course of day, you'll be doing 4 bags. This is just a schematic diagram. Physiologically, what you are doing is diffusion. The solutes are going into this fluid by a process of diffusion, and we are doing ultrafiltration. It's an osmotic ultrafiltration, as I told you, because this fluid is hyperosmolar as compared to the plasma. So if each fluid can take out about 300-400 extra, if each bag can take out 300-400 ml of extra fluid, that means in the course of a day you can have an ultrafiltration of over 1 to 1.5 liters, which keep the patients dry, and he can have a reasonable fluid intake. So this is a fairly popular therapy, and this has been spread all over the world now. You'll find that in many of these countries, the incidence, the penetration of peritoneal dialysis as compared to hemodialysis would range from 3% to about 20-25%, which depends on the policy and the finance and what kind of structure that they have in their medical system. Two countries stand out here. You will see you'll see that Hong Kong is 81%, and on the other side you'll see Mexico, which is 70%. These two countries actually stand out in their utilization of peritoneal dialysis. Now this is because these countries have a policy of PD first, which means any end-stage renal failure patient must undergo peritoneal dialysis first. That's the country's policy, because it is cheaper for them and they find it very useful for their patients to put them on peritoneal dialysis first. If there are any contraindication, or if during the course of time the patient faces any problem, whether it's a technique failure, you cannot continue peritoneal dialysis, then they are switched to hemodialysis. So this also means that by policy-wise, it is okay to do that. Why we cannot do that? There are a lot of factors. There are financial factors, reimbursement factors, there are logistic factors. So these are policy matters primarily. But the importance of showing this slide is that this is an indirect proof of how good the system can be, because there are two countries which have adopted the policy of PD first, and their penetration is up to 80% and about 70%. So this is an indirect proof of the efficacy of the system. Now, in India, it was very difficult for us to begin CAPD. So I pride myself as to be one of the people. I call myself an early adopter. I have played no part in the innovation of peritoneal dialysis, but I've been an early adopter in the early 90s when PD started in this country. A few of us took this up at many corners of this country. And of course, it was extremely difficult at that time, as shown in this cartoon. The basic problems were economics. It was very, very costly at that time as compared to hemo. The costs have really come down, and nowadays the hemo and peritoneal dialysis doesn't cost very differently. The other problem was the mindset and the bias amongst our own contemporaries, our peers. People were so much used to hemodialysis, they did not want to venture into something new. And people thought that if you put on PD, patient is going to die of peritonitis. There was a great fear about peritonitis. Of course, peritonitis is a problem. There's no denying that, which I'm going to come to peritonitis later. But the fear of peritonitis was more than the actual incidence of peritonitis. So these were the real problems right at the start. And historically, in 1991, the first patient was started in Chennai by Dr. Georgie Abraham, who had trained in Toronto Hospital under Dr. Oriopoulos, who was one of the doyens of peritoneal dialysis. Between 92 and 93, there were only about 5 centers, and we initiated on CAPD. We are doing with OSET and YSET, which is not very evolved, and the peritonitis rates were indeed high at that time. From 97 onwards, there were many players, other than Baxter, who remains the major player in the global market. There were Claris, which is an Indian company, and then Gambro, Fresenius, and J. Mitra, subsequently, was an Indian company. And the manufacturing has started in India from 97 onwards. In 97 also, we had the first conference of our society, and also it marked the exclusive use of the twin bag, which reduced the incidence of peritonitis. In 1999, we had our first journal, and from 2008, we are having a registry of the peritoneal dialysis patients. And indeed, the numbers really went up. From 400 in 1997, when we had the first conference, you can see an inflection point somewhere in the 2000, and it really went up. But from 2005, there is a growth, but the growth is not as much as it was here. This is because of the proliferation of the hemodialysis units. Practically every nursing home, small nursing home, and everywhere in the peripheral towns, district hospitals, you have dialysis now, hemodialysis. So probably, although PD is increasing, and increasing well, but perhaps not as much as it was increasing before 2005 because of the proliferation of the hemodialysis units. This is a global phenomenon, and it is not restricted to India or Calcutta only. This is happening practically everywhere. But PD will always have its place. About the current Indian penetration is about 17%. So we expect that around 20% patients will continue to remain on PD because it is beneficial for them. So, and we're also happy to show that we can have indeed great results from peritoneal dialysis. Amenla, one of my old patients, she lives in Nagaland. She was a post-transplant patient. Actually, she underwent a transplant which failed after about 2 years because of falciparum malaria. And she was on PD and there was no hemodialysis at that time in Nagaland. The family could not do a second transplant. So in 1994, in 1995-6, I think, I had put her on peritoneal dialysis. She lived 14 years on PD and she ran a small business. She did extremely well. Kavita Vasandani is still alive in this city. She's about 15 years plus. This is a very recent photograph. She does her dialysis herself. She's fully ambulatory. She's fully active in the family. So there are such examples all over the country about the viability of PD. So what are the benefits of PD? And by that we'll also extend that the same benefits would also qualify why PD is used first in some countries. Firstly, there is a preservation of the residual renal function. Now, if you put someone on dialysis, at that point, mostly the renal function is not zero. It's approaching zero. It may be about 5 or 10 ml, mostly. But that 5 or 10 ml of GFR is also very useful for the patient. This aids in the volume control. There is some urea creatinine solutes which really come out of that. There is a hormonal function, the erythropoietin, and there is a vitamin D function that can still remain in those small, 5 to 10 ml of GFR. So it is good to hold on to that. So we should not do anything to the patient where that even that 5 10 ml GFR also goes. So any dialysis modality where we can preserve that little thing we have still for a long period is beneficial for the patient. And PD preserves the residual renal function much more than hemodialysis does because it is less stressful hemodynamically. The hypotension chances are much less. So that in PD the residual renal function remains for a longer time. It provides continuous ultrafiltration. The PD in the ultrafiltration as opposed to hemo, where the ultrafiltration is kind of within 4 hours you're trying to ultrafilter whatever they have gained in 3 to 4 days. Whereas in PD it is kind of continuous, it's happening throughout the day. So the blood pressure is well controlled and the volume, there is not much yo-yo of the thing, it's kind of very stable. And it allows, and of course the independence and the employment, the PD patients, if they are up to it, they can really do everything. There are indirect effects. There is an early patient survival advantage, which I'm going to discuss. There's a reduced exposure to hepatitis C, which all the dialysis units are actually reeling from the problems of hepatitis B and C because of the cross-contamination. Their patient need transfusion, they get a blood, and some of them get hepatitis C. We don't know because there is a long incubation period. Even if you test them frequently, there's still a gap, and where you may treat him as a non-infected individual, but actually he is, and there is a cross-contamination, there's a lateral contamination, lateral transmission within the unit. And there's all our dialysis units have a certain amount of hepatitis C, so unless you really separate them out. So in PD, because you're doing it at home, you're not exposed to the unit per se, this is an advantage. Because there is no blood loss on a daily basis, there is a reduced need for erythropoietin and there's a reduced need for transfusion. It is cheaper in certain countries, not in India, where it is more or less the same or maybe slightly higher than hemodialysis still, but in some countries it is actually cheaper. And some countries have reported a slightly better outcome after transplant, although this is debatable. This is not a big point again, but the other points are extremely valid. So how do you choose? What do you do for whom? There you have a patient who is approaching end-stage renal failure. We discuss about transplant and he says, no, I can't go on to transplant right now, or he's old, he wants to be on dialysis. So what do you choose? And what do you choose for whom? How do you make that selection? So there are certain criteria where PD is preferred, certain situations, and there are certain situations where hemodialysis is preferred. You'll just see that where PD is preferred, these are the areas where HD is contraindicated, and vice versa, where hemodialysis is preferred, where the PD is contraindicated. Like PD is preferred at the extremes of age. So a very small child, you may not have that kind of machinery with you. And a very old person, it's very stressful for him to go to the dialysis unit 3 times a week. And he is maybe having cardiac problems. So at extremes of age, PD is a softer and a much nicer option. Distance and hemodialysis availability. If you don't have hemodialysis unit close to where you stay, you cannot do that. If you have access problems, if you don't have any fistula, you have done 2-3 fistulas, it's not working anymore, you can switch to PD. If you are hemodynamically unstable, angina, congestive cardiac failure, PD may be softer for you. Poor HD tolerance, and of course some patients may choose to be on peritoneal dialysis. They may feel that I don't have all these things, but I am an independent person. I don't want to go to the hospital. I want to take control of my body, I want to do the therapy myself, he will choose PD. Exactly opposite is hemodialysis. If you have abdominal adhesions, multiple abdominal operations, failed CAPD, then you cannot do it anymore. Then you have to do hemo. If you have disabilities, you cannot do peritoneal dialysis yourself. Somebody may be blind, somebody may be an amputee, there may be other kind of problem. Lack of family support. And again, choice. People who don't want to do the dialysis daily. They said, I don't mind going to the hospital, but other days I am free and I don't want to do anything myself. I cannot take all the trouble. I cannot remember so many things. I'll go, you do it for me. This is more of an Indian mindset that we don't want to take control of our problems. We generally want a passive therapy. This is one of the reasons hemo is again popular. So we have to understand that what is the ideal patient flow. Now, the ideal patient flow is you have CKD4, then CKD5. The best patient should go for transplant directly before they go on to any kind of dialysis. And then those who are not fit for transplant, they should choose either PD or hemodialysis. And these are interchangeable. If one fails, you can always switch to the other. But in real life, this doesn't happen. There is only a minuscule of patients who would do preemptive renal transplantation. That is transplant before the onset of dialysis. And again, a handful who will be going in for hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis in a planned manner. They do a fistula and this is less than 5% and this is less than 1%. Most people, even though we have counseled them, will have an emergency start. They will not do things in the proper time. They'll land up with pulmonary edema or severe acidosis hyperkalemia. And we have to start emergency hemodialysis. And once we stabilize them with hemodialysis, they go either for transplant or for PD. And again, the same cycle, they keep on moving between these three modalities depending on what is successful for them. Now, a young patient may need more than one kind of therapy, like Amenla of Nagaland, I told you. She went for transplant. Transplant failed after some years. She got an interim hemodialysis for stabilization. Then she did PD, and she remained on PD. So people move between these three therapies. Now, which one is better? There's a big debate about this, and there are n number of publications on this over the last 20 years. Generally, you have 3-4 trials which shows that HD has better outcomes, and you have again 3-4 trials which shows that PD has better outcomes, and there are some which shows that there are mixed outcomes. Now, by and large, PD has a better survival in the first 1 or 2 years of life. After 1 or 2 years, it is more or less the same. Now, very often you find scientific papers. It's no problem if you cannot read this, because it is impossible to understand this. This is all statistical jugglery. And it is very well summarized by this statement that if statisticians and epidemiologists argue about methodological trickery and they cannot agree, then there are probably not any significant differences in the outcomes between HD and PD, which is a very, very, very wise remark from all this. So basically they're the same. And therefore the choice of modality must remain not on the scientific part alone, but on the logistic and the policy requirements. So in summary, some patients must be treated by hemo, some patients must be treated by PD, but the message is that majority of the patients can be treated by either. Large majority would do well on either therapy. Therefore, selection must be therefore determined by the informed choice and the logistic factors. Now, one word about peritonitis. This is what a PD fluid looks like. Peritonitis is the Achilles heel. People are very afraid of peritonitis. Now, this is what a PD fluid looks like. This is transparent and clear. This is what a spent PD fluid looks like. Like this fluid has remained in the abdomen. We've just taken it out. It's slightly amber colored because there are more solids, but it's quite clear. You can read newsprint through that. This is what a peritonitis fluid is. It's cloudy. You cannot read through it. It becomes opaque. This has got pus cells in there. So what happens in peritonitis? The diagnosis is done if there is pain, fever, and cloudy fluid with an increased cell count. Testing is on suspicion, and we give empiric antibiotic. It is domiciliary treatment. When we hear peritonitis, because the first peritonitis we read in medical college was surgical peritonitis, a perforated peptic ulcer and patients are sick. Now, a CAPD peritonitis is not like that. It is not of an immediate, life-threatening condition. It is not like that. It is more chronic or subacute, at least to start with. If you treat it well, you can manage it at home. So patients take intraperitoneal antibiotics and they remain at home. We don't admit them. We admit only if they are very sick or if there is a delayed presentation. Patients become very septic. And majority, 70 to 80% respond well with intraperitoneal antibiotics. In case of non-response, the PD catheter has to be removed and we place them on hemodialysis. And reimplantation can be done after an interval of about 4 weeks or so. So what do you need for a PD unit basically? I understand that South Eastern Railway Hospital has got a wonderful program under Dr. Patnaik. Basically, the requirements are very simple. You just need a room with a space for training and for minor procedures. You need a nephrologist, a surgeon who implants a catheter, takes interest in doing that. It's a simple procedure, but again, not so simple because there are little tricks in that. If you can cause a kink in the catheter, there will be outflow problem. So it has to be done a little seriously. But I suppose anybody can do it. There should be registrars to help the main doctors, the PD nurse and a nutritionist, and of course the backbone will again still be a hemodialysis unit because sometimes these patients may need an interim hemodialysis. So the recommendations are, I'm now saying not on PD, just overall, that counseling for RRT as a whole I'm speaking now, should begin as early as CKD 4. Preemptive transplant whenever possible. Younger patient, available donor, no vascular disease. There's no need to wait. As you approach stage 5, you can go in for a transplant. The results are the best. Careful evaluation of cardiovascular disease, because if there is an intervention you require in the first 6 months, you may lead to graft loss. If there is something to be done about the heart, it's better done before the transplant. Early placement of fistula or a catheter, and medical and logistic factors both are important in the modality selection. Now the messages for the non-nephrologists is that transplant outcomes have improved markedly in the last few years. Again, preemptive transplant is preferable whenever donor is available. Dialysis outcome has improved markedly, although the therapy penetration is low because of cost factors mainly in our countries. We should view hemodialysis and peritoneal dialysis not as competing, but as complementary. And there is no competition between these two. You choose what is best for you, and patients should move between one kind of dialysis to the other and also to transplant. So you should view transplant and dialysis as integrated care, and one is not really at loggerheads with the other one. So finally, just the last summary. So PD is a very good therapy, it's a very gentle therapy for people, and particularly for elderly people who are doing it at home. It's active therapy, home-based, softer. Diet is more relaxed, less blood loss, there is no hepatitis B or C. Problems, of course, there are some problems. Peritonitis is the main one. There can be weight gain because you're absorbing a lot of glucose from the fluid. So there can be a little weight gain, but this can be controlled. There are ways of controlling them. Some old people get depressed because there's a sense of isolation somewhere. These are a few small, minor setbacks in this. But overall, this is a well-established therapy for over 30 years now. And across the world, current penetration in India is about 17-18%. And as I told you, in some countries, 70 to 80%, because by policy they put PD first, which is an indirect proof of the efficacy of the system. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Datta. As usual, he speaks always excellent, and he makes the audience always understandable and very simplified. Thank you, sir.
May I request Dr. Sudipta Raha to present a memento to Dr. Arun Pradhan Datta. Now may we request Dr. Shumanta Dasgupta, ACHD Anesthesia, to present mementos to our chairpersons, Dr. A.P. Patnaik and Dr. Sudipta Raha. There's a short tea break. Anyone who is interested to rejuvenate themselves can do so outside this hall in the lovely sun-drenched garden. Meanwhile, there's a poster session going on outside this hall. The presenters, the three presenters, first is Thalassemia Career Study in Schools in Kharagpur by Dr. Nazmi, ACHG Pathology, Kharagpur. Takayashu's Arthritis, a challenging case for anesthetist by Dr. Chandan Pal, ADM Anesthesia Garden Reach. And the last, a very rare case of adolescent malignancy by Dr. Shujo Datta, DNB Gynecology Obstetrics. The judges of this poster session are Dr. Kalyan Ghosh, retired Chief Medical Director of this hospital, Dr. K.P. Kaur, retired Chief Health Director, Garden Reach. The presenters are requested to stand in front of their posters. We move on with our next session, an overview on multiple sclerosis. The speaker is none other than Dr. A.P. Patnaik, who is the Chief Medical Director of this very hospital, the torchbearer of this conference. To chair this session, we have Dr. Achut Mondal, Chief Medical Superintendent.
Next